On the buzz meter this Sunday, the media kept urging, insisting, demanding a scalp in the VA scandal, and now they've got one. Eric Shinseki pushed out on Friday after investigators confirmed press reports of secret waiting lists at veterans hospitals.
The Secretary of Veterans Affairs did not have to wait long to learn his fate.
The man at the top of the VA has paid with his job.
Jay Carney has been fielding tough questions about Eric Shinseki for weeks. Suddenly, they're both gone.
But will news organizations now move on, simply lose interest in the more complicated tale of how our vets are being denied medical care? And on Jay Carney calling it quits, did his constant and sometimes personal battles with reporters undermine his effectiveness? Hillary Clinton leaks her book chapter on Benghazi to Politico. Will that help her diffuse the coverage of this story? And why are she and her team so wary of the press that her longtime spokesman says there's no such thing as straight reporting anymore? And Brian Williams sitting down with Ed Snowden in Russia for a one-hour conversation with the fugitive from justice.
Are you looking for clemency or amnesty? Would you like to go home?
I don't think there's ever been any question that I'd like to go home. I mean, I've from day one said that I'm doing this to serve my country.
Was this a hard-hitting interview or a primetime infomercial? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. From the moment the Veterans Administration scandal mushroomed into a national story, the Beltway press had one relentless focus. Would President Obama dump his VA secretary? And suddenly, all the talk every hour was about Eric Shinseki.
What you heard today was an invitation for a resignation.
Yes.
And I think he's gone by the weekend.
My expectation is that General Shinseki, a patriot, will voluntarily fall on his sword.
It's now a question of when, not if, Shinseki will go.
And a few minutes ago, Secretary Shinseki offered me his own resignation. With considerable regret, I accepted.
But will the media's interest soon fade now that the ritual sacrifice has been made and Shinseki is toast? Joining us now, Lauren Ashburn, Fox News contributor who hosts Social Buzz on the Fox website. Jonah Goldberg, editor-at-large of National Review and a Fox News contributor. And Dana Milbank, columnist for The Washington Post. Did the media with their constant drumbeat? Is he gone? Is he leaving tomorrow? Why hasn't he been fired yet? Did he leave? Did they leave President Obama with no choice but to push Shinseki out?
I don't know if it was exactly President Obama. I'm going to push back a little bit against your premise, and I'm going to say that Shinseki, a good man, didn't want to be a distraction, which is what the president said. Give me a minute. It is the official line. But this is the dawdler-in-chief we're talking about here. Take a look at Secretary Sebelius, HHS Secretary. How long did it take him to finally lop her head off?
But it seems to me the press was writing stories not about Eric Shinseki, decorated war hero, but about Obama's failure to show leadership in this scandal.
There is a little bit of difference here in that Obamacare was seen as a partisan scandal, and this is, affects every single person.
Jonah, I understand the need for the president to show leadership and action by doing something, making the change. But why did the media focus...
That would be a really cool change of pace, yeah, come on.
Why did the media focus so obsessively on this one personnel move?
I gotta say, it was a little strange to me. I mean, if almost by, I think, universal consensus in Washington, everyone understood that this was essentially a pre-written kabuki theater kind of thing where the guy's got to fall on a sword. I mean, it was almost like everyone had written the copy in advance and then want to get to the beach, so they just kept the drumbeat going. And I think everybody basically agrees that it's sort of unfair to Shinseki. I think he was a bad manager, great American, great patriot, bad manager. They knew they had these problems. His elite team lied to him, apparently, according to reports. But there was just sort of this expectation. This is how these scandals unfold, and the guy's got to do what he's got to do.
Dana, you called for Shinseki to be pushed out in your Washington Post column.
And he responded to me personally.
He did. You got your wish. So what exactly has been accomplished except for the political appearances?
Well, I'm not sure anything has, and now we'll go into that long question of do we repair something that's been broken for decades, and the likely answer to it is no. But Shinseki dug his own grave here, and I think the president made problems for himself by up until a week ago saying, well, if things are found to be wrong. And guys, this wasn't a question of if. It was very clear. So I think they dragged it out and made themselves look like weak leaders on this. I think there was needless bloodletting there, and they could have taken care of this a while ago.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I think Dana is absolutely right about one thing. Somehow the White House set the standard that as long as these were isolated incidents, everything, Shinseki had his job. But the second the IG came out and said, no, it's systemic, the standard was all of a sudden he has to lose his job.
I think it was embarrassing the way the Beltway press made this all about Shinseki. Sure, he deserves responsibility and probably needed to go. But now, will the media essentially declare mission accomplished and move on from this scandal?
I don't think all media will, but without the personification, we already have the head of Shinseki gone, and without the political flashpoint, this is really a bipartisan issue. I think that it will fade into the background.
The narrative is easy. Is the secretary going to be kicked out the door or not? But the more complicated issue, and the New York Times had a good story on Friday about primary care doctor shortage in the VA system when the 400 need to be hired. It is more complicated to get into the hospitals and the doctors and the waiting list.
Do we need 10,000 new doctors? What do we do with the federal pay scale? Do we just rejigger the way the VA is right now and move the pots of money around? I mean, that takes real digging, even for opinion people to have to go through all of that information. It's a lot easier to just report on the top and what's happening.
Now, you touched on this a moment ago. I mean, I credit the Arizona Republic and CNN for breaking the story about the secret waiting list at the Phoenix facility, which then mushroomed into our understanding that this is going on in a lot of places across the country. But if this problem has been going on for years, and there are GAO reports going back more than a decade, the press, for all its outrage right now, hasn't exactly been all over it.
No, although I think if you go back and you look, you find out there are a lot of stories in the interior pages of a lot of, McClatchy had done the good stuff on all this.
Periodically, absolutely.
Sure. And one of the reasons why I think this actually will stay in the news longer than it might normally is that this is so politically radioactive in congressional districts. The veterans are incredibly well organized. They're incredibly popular. There's no counter lobby to veterans in the United States, which is one of the reasons why we let the VA get so bloated and inefficient, is that there was nobody out there who wanted to take on the political task of angering the veterans lobby. Usually there's a lobby to counterbalance. In this case, there wasn't one. And so I think that because Congress really wants more pounds of flesh than just Shinseki, and we got elections coming up, I think it will actually stay in the news a lot longer.
I think you'll have two things going on. One is, sort of the commission looking into it, the important business of government of getting it right, and that'll be, buried late in the broadcast, on multiple clicks down the website. I think some outlets, surely not the one we're on now, will try to continue to make this a political scandal. And you saw a little hint of that with Boehner last week saying, I don't care about Shinseki, I want to know what the president was doing.
Well, it's very interesting that you had that little mild swipe at Fox News, because you wrote in your column that unlike some other stories which we could debate, that this is not a phony Republican hype scandal.
Right. Now, does it become a question of, who destroyed papers or didn't reply to this subpoena? I fear that's probably what's going to happen.
And is that boring
in the House of
for
Representatives?
the press?
No, that's very exciting because that's a political scandal. But, I think if we're being honest about this, we have to say this is a long-standing problem. Obama said in 2007, 2008 he was going to do something about it. He didn't. That's his problem. But it's not a political scandal in that sense. It's a failure of government.
He did do one thing about it. He shoveled a hell of a lot more money into it. Funding for the VA has gone up a lot in recent years, and if you think that's the answer to these problems, great.
Well, there are a lot more veterans who need to be treated because of the two wars.
But you also, when you have a bureaucracy that basically gives away something for free, by definition, you're going to end up having rationing and bureaucratic problems.
But we are going to move on to Hillary Clinton and who she's going to be up against.
She's probably responsible for the VA problems when you get right down to it.
When in doubt, it seems so, right?
And we're going to move on to the congressional races. And this will, just by news hole standards, fade.
But you don't want that to happen.
No, of course I don't. And I want to hold the media's feet to the fire on this. I have an uncle who was a veteran. I have a family member who served in World War II and is dependent on the VA. And this story is important.
The good thing about the coverage in the last few days, I would say, is that we're hearing the voices of veterans and their family members, and it's putting a real human face on this. This has really been a kind of a gut-wrenching scandal, and I hope that doesn't fade. I want to turn now to our other topic where you kind of expected Shinseki would step down on Friday. We were not expecting Jay Carney to announce his resignation. President Obama coming into the briefing room to say his press secretary will be leaving soon. Let's take a look. This is a few days ago on the VA scandal, ironically enough, of Carney, Fox's Ed Henry mixing it up.
Very troubling.
Why is he still tolerating it? Where is the punishment?
Ed, I don't know
where
how else to disappoint you, but I'll give you the same answer that I gave.
It's not me being disappointed. There's veterans waiting 115 days.
Right, and that's why.
See what he turned it back on him.
Very testy and personal.
I'm sure Jay Carney was burned out after 3 years. That's a long tenure by modern standards.
And that was very ham-handed of him to do that.
Well, and this leads to my question. Did Carney quit because he had reached a point where really could no longer be effective?
Well, yes. I think the answer to that is definitely yes. And that tipping point came when the Benghazi email was released about the White House shaping the talking points. And he said that wasn't about Benghazi. And at that moment, he was a dead man walking.
Every spokesman, of course, Jonah, has to deny and deflect bad stories. But how much did that and Obamacare and VA and the battles in the press room, how much did it erode Carney's credibility?
Well, some of us didn't think he had all that much credibility going in.
Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, look, I mean, this is a pet peeve of mine, but, you know, as you've written, I think, a couple of times now, this administration has drafted enormous numbers of people from the mainstream media to work in the administration. And I always think it's sort of interesting how these supposedly objective reporters, how did they figure out that they would be incredibly effective left-wing spinners and hacks for a Democratic administration? I mean, it's like they couldn't figure it out from their text, right?
Did you have the same complaint when Tony Snow moved from
Everyone
Fox
knew
News?
what Tony Snow's positions were.
Yeah.
Tony was never an objective. He was an opinion journalist, right? But Jay Carney was the Time bureau chief. He was a news guy, and yet somehow everyone just sort of guessed that he would be an incredibly effective spinner for a Democratic administration. We saw it with Linda Douglas. We see it with lots of people. Look, at the same time, look, I think it was 3 years is a long time for Jay Carney. It's also a long time for us. There was something about his style that was incredibly grating. There was sort of the best boy at the front of the class style that I think annoyed a lot of people. And the way he ended up eventually, you can't blame him too much because the lies and the spin that he had to provide were what the administration wanted him to provide.
Well, he also made few, if any, high-profile mistakes, which is a significant accomplishment. But Dana, he did spend his career at Time, and I seemed to me there was an evolution of his style where he often was challenging reporters like Ed Henry, Jonathan Karl, and others, challenging their motivation and almost suggesting they were being partisan and asking certain tough questions.
Well, he managed to piss off a lot of reporters along the way. I wrote that he resigned amid allegations of extremely long wait times for White House press briefings.
I had a similar tweet about his backlog of lies. So
no, exactly. But I think it's sort of the case of like the reformed smoker. Who's particularly pious about preaching to other smokers, and I think that's what happened with Jay. As no longer as a reporter, he came to look on the ills of his profession. But he didn't have a whole lot of credibility. I don't think a press secretary has had a whole lot of credibility back to Mike McCurry, and he wasn't really good for his boss. He was good for the press.
Right, interesting. Josh Earnest, the new White House press secretary, he's a well-liked figure with a little bit of a softer touch. We'll see how he does. Send me a tweet about our show during this hour at Howard Kurtz. We are going to read, as we do every week, some of your tweets at the end of the program.